So these are my thoughts on which survivor stands the best chance of escaping against each of DBD's antagonists. Now, to set the stage, I'm not thinking of this in terms of a 1v1, but instead, let's say it's a normal DBD trial. In other words, there's 3 other survivors on the team, but the question is, who personally stands the best chance of getting out against each of these antagonists, regardless if the other 3 get out or not? Now, a few ground rules. I can only say each survivor up to a maximum of 2 times. Otherwise, I'd simply say Ash and Cheryl for every single one of them. Now, there might be some cases where one survivor is the obvious choice, but I'm saving them for some other ones later down the road. That will also mean that there will often be more than one correct answer. So feel free to let me know down in the comments, who do you think stands a good chance of surviving each of these? I will also not be using any legendary skins except as honorable mentions, because I wanted to keep it to the core main characters in this list. And I will be discussing perks as part of my reasoning. I know teachable perks are a thing in the game for gameplay, but for the sake of this conversation, we're going to assume that each of the perks are unique to that character's identity and not shared across the roster. All right, so we're starting with Trapper, and my pick to be the most likely to survive Trapper is Jake. So Saboteur allows Jake to sabotage without a toolbox, and it used to allow him to sabotage Trapper's traps. Now, yes, this ability was removed in patch 3.6 for gameplay reasons. However, I'd argue that we can still include that in this conversation from a lore perspective. But even if you don't like me using that as a reason, he's also got Calm Spirit, which would allow him to disarm the traps at least, without triggering the crows and alerting Trapper. Additionally, his perk Iron Will shows that Jake has a very high pain tolerance, which means he would be able to endure the pain of getting caught in one of Trapper's traps more than a lot of the others, and thus it would be harder for Trapper to track him afterwards. And finally, Jake is an expert survivalist, and he would be much more adept at spotting Trapper's traps in order to avoid getting trapped in the first place. All right, next up we have Wraith, and my pick to survive Wraith would be Dwight, because they both have terrible bosses, and I think they'd bond over this. And Wraith would let Dwight go. Of course, I'm kidding. My real pick for this one is Yoichi. His perk Parental Guidance allows him to stun the killer and suppress his pools of blood, grunts of pain, and scratch marks for a short duration. And these are the very things that Wraith especially uses to be able to track his prey. Yoichi's psychic abilities have given him unprecedented knowledge of other realms and planes of existence. And now, I'll admit, I'm completely speculating here, but I think that his psychic abilities would very potentially give him the ability to at least sense Wraith, even while invisible, and be able to avoid him. And so that's why I'm picking Yoichi. Next up for Hillbilly, I'm picking Steve to be the most likely to survive him. My reason for this is pretty straightforward. Steve is an athlete, having played on the Hawkins basketball team and the swim team. And dodging Hillbilly's sprints would require both speed and dexterity, both of which Steve excels in. So in my mind, the survivors that stand the best chance of escaping him are the ones known for their athleticism, much like Steve or Meg. But I'll be using Meg elsewhere, so I'm going to go with Steve on this one. All right, next up is Nurse, and I think, to me, the obvious choice is Ash. He's got loads of experience in fighting supernatural evil. Nurse wouldn't even make Ash blink. See what I did there? And he's got luck and prophecy on his side. With Nurse being one of the more supernatural on the roster, it makes sense to me to go with Ash. Right now we come to Myers, and I think the pretty clear choice here is Laurie. So yes, the DLC is based on the Laurie from the original movie, and many of you have pointed out to me that Laurie would not have survived without some help. But keep in mind, in this scenario we've set up, she does have help because she's got 3 other survivors with her. So she wouldn't be alone. It's not a 1v1. And her scrappiness and survival instinct makes her the most likely one, in my opinion, to survive Myers. And we certainly know that she has the potential for it. Next up, we have Hag, and the most likely one in my mind to escape her is Michaela. Now, from a lore perspective, Michaela's boons make her incredibly powerful as a survivor. She's able to change the rules of the trial in ways that very few survivors are, and also in ways that are directly opposed to Hag. And so for all intents and purposes, Michaela is the direct counter to Hag. Yes, Hag's phantasms would still be something to deal with, but without her hexes, Hag would be severely weakened overall. Michaela can drastically shift the power dynamic of a trial, especially against Hag. And so she is my pick for being the one most likely to survive Hag. Next up, we have Doctor, and my pick for this is David. So my reasoning for this is that David is used to taking on a lot of physical pain through his fights. So of the whole roster, he is one of the ones that is most likely to be able to take on a lot of pain and keep going. Now, obviously, from a gameplay perspective, this is evened out across all the survivors. Lore-wise, David would be able to tank a lot more pain from Doctor than a lot of the other survivors, and thus able to keep going and keep pressing on. Now, an honorable mention for this would be Jake. Because of Calm Spirit, he would be able to avoid getting detected by the Doctor a lot longer. But I'm going with David as my main because I chose Jake to be the most likely to survive against Huntress. Now this one's difficult for me, so I'm kind of expecting a lot of disagreement on this one. But for me, it ultimately comes down to the fact that they're both experts in the wilderness. Huntress is obviously a skilled hunter, but then who better to counter her than an expert survivalist? He'd be one of the hardest survivors to track, making him the most likely, in my mind, to escape Huntress. All right, on to Bubba. Now this one, I feel like I could have chosen actually quite a few. I don't know why. I feel like a lot of the survivors would stand a better chance of escaping Bubba than some of the others. But I ultimately went with Zarina. She's used to putting herself in danger, and she's smart and able to distract the killer. And she's described as looking out for others, meaning that she'd be more likely to work together with the team, and teamwork makes survival a lot more likely. Now I realize I just described her in ways that would help against most of the human antagonists, not just Bubba. But I like Zarina and I wanted to include her, and I felt like this was one of the better opportunities to do so. All right, next up we have Freddy, and the obvious choice here for me is Quentin. He's beaten Freddy before. He knows how to combat him. With his previous experience and his track record, he's the most likely to escape Freddy in my mind. All right, next up we have Pig, and I'm going with Jonah on this one. His mathematical and puzzle solving skills, I think, give him the best chance of beating her traps and outsmarting her to escape. All right, next up we have Clown, and similar to Bubba, I feel like there were multiple options for this one, but ultimately I've gone with Kate. To me, it's fitting thematically since they're paired together in the DLC. She knows how to spot multiple escape routes, so if Clown shuts one down with his tonics, she'll immediately know where to go to next. She's sneaky, but if she gets caught, she's also scrappy enough to be able to slip away. So again, there were a lot that I could choose from, but this seemed like a good opportunity to choose Kate. All right, next up we have Spirit, and I also went with Ash on this one. I have the same reasoning here that I did with Nurse. He's got lots of experience fighting against evil and supernatural forces that Spirit wouldn't even face him. Yes, I did it again. You're welcome. He's still got luck and prophecy on his side. Just like Nurse, I think Ash is the most likely to escape on this one. All right, next up is the Legion, and my pick for this one was Bill. Now, I understand that survivors are limited in how they can fight back, and the entity empowers even the more human killers to have more supernatural strength. However, if there's one survivor on the roster that I see taking on a group of teenagers and outsmarting them, it's Bill. He's the old wise man and has combat experience and survived a zombie apocalypse against horrifying creatures. A few punks wouldn't come close to shaking him, in my opinion. And so even without fighting back, I see him strategically outsmarting them. Now, an honorable mention here is Jeff. I made this argument in another video where Jeff painted a mural for the Legion, and it could be because of their previous relationship that the Legion would show mercy on Jeff and let him escape. But that's a big if, and I wouldn't be super confident in that happening. Next up, we have Plague, and I chose Bill or Leon to escape her. Not just because I love all three of those characters. Now, I know that Plague is technically one of the more human characters compared to some of the other ones. However, her ability reminds me a lot of an RE or Left 4 Dead creature. So having to avoid infectious projectile vomit wouldn't be outside of their experience for either of them. Now, to be fair, I could have probably also said any of the RE characters here. Next up, we have Ghostface, and I'm going with Meg on this one. Quick and Quiet allows her to trump Ghostface's ability to see auras with I'm all ears, which makes her able to move around the map a lot faster without getting detected. She's also got Sprint Burst to get out of tight situations when he does find her. He's one for whom speed and stealth are key ingredients to escape, and Meg's got both. So I'm going with Meg on this one. All right, next up we have our good boy Demo, and I'm going with Steve and Nancy on this one. Now this one is purely because they have experience escaping Demogorgons before, so they would have the most context for what they're up against and how to evade it. Plus, there's the Stranger Things plot armor on their side, at least until season 5. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the video and you'd like to see more content from me, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I'd appreciate it. Thanks. All right, next up we have Oni, and I honestly struggled with this one because, to be fair, I think the odds are very low of anyone escaping Ani. But I ultimately settled on Vittorio. He's had centuries of experience in the entity's realm and is easily the most experienced survivor on the roster when it comes to surviving trials. He's also a very skilled fighter. Now, even though survivors can't fight back, as far as we know, in Vittorio's lore, there's a part where he's sparring with someone else during training, and he's not actually fighting back. He's only defending himself, and he's able to successfully do this without taking any hits. So who better to defend against and avoid the attacks of a samurai? Does this mean I think Vittorio definitely survives? No. But I think he stands the best chance out of anyone because of his experience and fighting abilities. All right, next up we have Deathslinger, and there's a couple I could have chosen here, but I ultimately went with Antonia. All jokes and theories aside, though, about her being the entity, Deathslinger is a skilled bounty hunter and tracker, but Nia's whole character revolves around being sneaky, remaining undetected, and getting out of tight situations. So to me, this makes her one of the most likely ones to be able to remain undetected by him long enough to be able to escape. All right, next up we have Pyramid Head, and the easy answer here for me is Cheryl. She's used to the horrors of Silent Hill and surviving there. And I'd argue that she is the most powerful survivor on the roster due to her connection with the entity. If anyone is surviving Pyramid Head, it's Cheryl. I mean, she took out Silent Hill's god. Now, an honorable mention is obviously James. I haven't played Silent Hill 2, but I've done a lot of reading into the lore because I find it quite fascinating. So please, any Silent Hill fans out there, please correct me if I get any of this wrong. But in its truest form, Pyramid Head only manifests within Silent Hill out of James's subconsciousness because of his feelings of guilt and need for punishment. James eventually faces these feelings, and Pyramid Head is no longer needed, and so the only thing, my understanding, that can take out Pyramid Head is Pyramid Head after he's no longer needed. And the way I read his DBD lore, it is at this moment when Pyramid Head is no longer needed in Silent Hill because James has faced his feelings of guilt and need for judgment and dealt with those. It is at this moment that the entity reaches out and invites Pyramid Head into the realm, giving him another purpose. So the thing is, because James is a legendary skin, he doesn't have any DBD lore to go off of. So we're not exactly sure when he got taken by the entity, and whether or not he's already faced those feelings of guilt and need for punishment. So it's possible if he has faced those, that Pyramid Head would actually leave him alone and let him escape. But if he hasn't, he at least comes into the realm with some experience having escaped Pyramid Head already. And so that's why he's my honorable mention pick to survive. All right, next up we have Blight, and I'm going with Meg for the same reasons I said about Steve. Meg is known for her athletic abilities, and she'd have the dexterity to be able to dive out of the way of Blight's rushes and avoid them more than other survivors. Now, similar to Oni, I feel like the whole roster is going to have a difficult time surviving Blight, but Meg would at least have somewhat of an advantage over the others. All right, next up we have twins, and I'm going with Elodie on this one. Elodie is used to being on the run and avoiding those looking for her. She's capable of distracting the killer, and she's scrappy and resilient. I feel like there were a lot that I could have gone with on this one, but ultimately I chose Elodie because of their DLC pairing. It seemed fitting. All right, next up we have Trickster, and again, I feel like there's probably several that could survive Trickster, but I ended up going with Yoon Jin. She knows Trickster very well, and she knows how he works. Both of them are incredibly intelligent, and it's true that the Trickster trapped her right before they were being taken by the entity, but that's because she didn't really yet know who he was, and he ambushed her. Now that she knows what he's capable of, she's going to be much more wary of his tricks. Now, some of you may have noticed that this is actually opposite of what I said in the video about which survivors could survive their DLC pairings. But the more I've thought about it, I've changed my mind. I think she does stand a good chance of escaping him. All right, next up we have Nemesis, and I'm going with Jill on this one because by the time she's taken into the fog, she already has experience escaping him. And yes, she did need a railgun to defeat him in Resident Evil 3, but she doesn't have to defeat him here. She only has to escape him, which she's shown she's good at. And she's also not alone. Now, I would throw Carlos in here as an honorable mention because he also has experience escaping and surviving Nemesis. All right, we come to Pinhead, and he's a little bit difficult for me because I haven't actually seen the movie, but I've read the lore. He's probably similar to Oni in that it's going to be incredibly difficult for any of the survivors to get out on this one. But ultimately, I'm going to go with Adam. He's very intelligent, and to me, that makes him one of the more likely ones to solve the box and banish Pinhead. Honorable mentions would also be Jonah or Felix, because I could see either of them also solving the box and banishing Pinhead. All right, next up is Artist, and I think this is another one that's going to be really tough for most of the survivors. But I chose Ace because of his luck. I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting on a gen just to have one of her crows just fly right past me, where if I was at a different spot on the gen, it would have hit me and she would have known where I was and I would have been in trouble. Now, I don't mean to say that playing Artist involves a lot of luck. It actually involves quite a bit of skill, but just that surviving Artist takes a lot of luck on your side. And so for me, Ace is the most likely one to survive in this case because of his luck in the realm. All right, next up we get to Onryo, and my choice for this one is Yoichi. He's survived her before and he has psychic powers of his own. Well, I'd probably argue that no one is escaping Onryo. If anyone's doing it, it's him. All right, next up, we have Dredge, and I picked Hattie for this one. Now, Dredge is another one that I'd really say I don't think anyone is surviving unless I was to cheat and say Ash again. But Hattie has spent her entire adult life glimpsing into these overlaps between her realm and the entities and investigating the paranormal. So I would say she stands a chance because of her experience. Now, when I did the DLC pairings video, I chose Dredge, and to be honest, that would probably still be my choice, but at least Hattie stands a chance. That said, Tome Hattie, she absolutely survives. She's awesome. All right, next up we come to Wesker, and in that same DLC pairings video, I waffled back and forth between whether or not Ada could survive. And having reflected on that for several weeks now, I'm convinced Ada would escape. She always does. Yes, with help, but remember, she does have help in the form of the other survivors on the team. And if Leon's on that team, then she definitely survives because together they're pretty much unstoppable. She always seems to be able to escape the impossible in the RE series, So I believe Ada would escape Wesker despite how powerful he is. Now, honorable mentions would be Chris or Shiva, because they took on Wesker in Resident Evil 5. And yes, they don't have rockets in DBD, but they do have experience going against him and know how he works. And all they have to do is survive. So that gives them an edge in escaping. All right, we come to the Knight. And my pick for this one was Vittorio. He knows how Tarhouse works. And the Knight only captured him the first time because Vittorio wasn't expecting the double cross. Now, he's fully aware of who the Knight is and what he's capable of, so I don't think he's going to get surprised again. Vittorio is a very capable defensive fighter, as we've already talked about, and he could defend himself against the Knight and his pack's attacks better than the others. The Knight is described as a ruthless fighter, but I get the sense from Vittorio's lore that he's actually more capable and just chooses peace instead. So for me, Vittorio makes sense here. And finally, we have the Skull Merchant. And I went with Feng Min on this one. Now hear me out. As I looked over the roster, I was thinking that the person most likely to survive the Skull Merchant was somebody who is going to be tech savvy. And the one that stuck out to me most in that category was Feng Min. Yes, it's true that just because she's a gamer doesn't mean that she also understands technology well. But being a gamer, and a competitive gamer at that, it's a strong likelihood that her interests extend beyond just gaming and into the wider tech sphere. She, in my mind, would be the most likely one to be able to see the drones, spot what they're doing, and figure out how to disable them. Now, for gameplay reasons, it seems like the survivors have all become super hackers, but lore-wise, I think Feng Min would be the most likely to be able to pull this off. All right, so those are my thoughts. Who else do you think stands a good chance of surviving each of these antagonists? Let me know down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, will you please let me know by hitting that like button? Also, memberships are now live on the channel, so if you'd like to support the channel by becoming a member and also gain access to some unique perks, hit that join button for some more information. As always, you are awesome, stay awesome, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers. So with Nerth, David is used to taking on a lot of physical. She's sneaky, but she's also scrappy enough that she... Wow. Why do I have to make such hard sentences to say? But this was a good opportunity to use Chit. He's got a lot of experience fighting against evil and super... Evil? Evil? He fought evil, guys. What? All right, next up we have Deathslinger, and she's used to the horrors of survival. So please, any Silent Phil? Silent Phil. Are you a Silent Phil? But in his truest form... I'm so tired.